2021. As you know, we've come to you on multiple occasions while we're here. Super excited to see young conservatives getting involved in politics. Not only that, the different demographic of people here really standing up for conservative beliefs, proper theology as well from an evangelical perspective, and also a lot of organizations encouraging young adults as well as Americans in general to just get involved. Not only from a lobbying perspective or an advocacy perspective, but also from an educational perspective. And from that educational perspective, today we have Trent England from Save Our State on Voice of Truth. Trent, thank you for being here.
Yeah, it's my pleasure. Thanks, Shannon.
And we are super excited from Voice of Truth and from CSN to really encourage people to, one, understand American history, understand a general basis and foundation in politics. A lot of people don't know a lot of different things. American history specifically, biblical history, but you're here from Save Our State. What are you encouraging people to do with your organization?
Yeah, what we do, we defend the Electoral College. You know, it's one of these somewhat obscure parts of our Constitution, although of course a lot more people know about it these days than maybe 20 years ago. But I really believe that the Electoral College is a part of our Constitution that protects our elections, it protects our system of states, and it helps, frankly, to educate Americans about why we have checks and balances, why we aren't just a pure democracy where the majority can do whatever they want. And you know, in that, it really rests on this Judeo-Christian idea that human beings are not perfect, right? We don't want a dictatorship of the one, but we also don't want a dictatorship of the demos, of the many, right?
Yep.
In either case, you're subjecting yourself to the tyranny of human nature. And so we defend the Electoral College, we educate Americans about it, and we fight back specifically against a plan that the left hatched about a dozen years ago called the National Popular Vote Interstate Compact, where they are trying to basically nullify the Electoral College using state legislation. Without changing the Constitution, they're trying to get states to give away their electoral votes effectively in a way that would force the Electoral College to rubber stamp the popular vote result. So this is really dangerous. It's under, it's under the table. There's tens of millions of dollars behind it, and my group, I formed it in 2009 specifically to fight back against that, and then we broadened to really educating Americans. So I'm just so excited to be here and talk with you and all your listeners.
It's amazing because a lot of people don't understand how elections work. We have a very broad misconception in America. A lot of people don't even know how their state elections work, even for their commissioners and even their school boards. So to get people educated is very, very important. We're extremely passionate about it. Recently, as you mentioned, for the last dozen years, there's really been a push to get rid of this Electoral College. We've seen it more recently. Who now in government that is actually sitting have you seen really perpetuate the idea for whatever agenda to remove the Electoral College? Yeah,
Elizabeth Warren and Bernie Sanders have been a couple of the big champions against the Electoral College. Hillary Clinton's not really in the news anymore, but she's been a big enemy of the Electoral College. Even going back before she lost in 2016, she's been calling for, abolishing or nullifying in some way the Electoral College system. So, it's really coming from those folks on the political left who, frankly, they don't respect the American founders. They don't respect our Constitution. They think that they know better than the founders and the framers. And politically, they can see that they would benefit, at least in the short run. I think in the long run, you'd have a lot of harm that would affect everyone across the board. But in the short run, if your power base is in the big cities, right, if you would be more successful if New York and Los Angeles and San Francisco had more political power, then getting rid of the Electoral College is sort of a political no-brainer.
Yeah.
And that's, I think that's where these folks come from. I mean, Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez has numerous times, tweeted about how she thinks the Electoral College is stupid or racist. I know she was driving through, I think, Arizona or Texas or somewhere out here and, taking pictures of the desert and saying, oh, this system's so dumb that it gives empty land votes, which is ridiculous and insulting to rural Americans. But, that's her point of view as a waitress from Manhattan.
We all have a right to our point of view, even though we don't like it.
That's right.
Don't even get me started on AOC. That's a whole nother interview for another day. But there is this beehive mentality. We see that take place in large cities. we see that the Electoral College is constantly attacked, especially in this last election with President Trump, and we see current President Joe Biden. Now, the red-blooded, aggressive, conservative American who has a passion for everything America, evangelical or not, has an ideology that has really manifested itself after this last election. There's this thought process taking place in conservative Americans that the left's push to remove the Electoral College doesn't just come from a maybe dozen-year-old ideology for whatever control that they want, but more that in their mind from conservative America, it allows them to maybe manipulate the popular vote, the majority vote more, and eradicate the Electoral College. So what do you say about the voting corruption that is on the table?
Yeah, no, I think that's right. I think you can trace this back to 3 different strains, and certainly one of them is what you describe, which is, to put it in shorthand, with the Electoral College, all you can steal in Chicago is Illinois. Mm-hmm. All you can steal in Los Angeles is California, right? Without the Electoral College, from especially a place like Los Angeles County has 10 million people.
Yes, they do.
You could potentially steal the whole country just out of that one city, right? So this is a legitimate concern that people have, right? We have seen American elections, and it's not just recent. I mean, going back into the 19th century, there are famous instances of real systemic corruption in American elections. A lot of people recently have been looking at 1876, which is a good, cautionary tale of what can happen when trust breaks down and people are, in that election, people clearly on both sides were cheating, right?
Yep.
So, no, I think that is a legitimate concern. And to broaden that, elections only work when people have faith in them.
Yes.
So, I get frustrated when I see some of these folks, whether they're on the left or some people on the right, who say, oh, well, we shouldn't be concerned about elections. We just need to trust the officials who carry this out. That's not how it works. That's never been how it works.
That's
right?
a utopia that does not exist.
An election system it has to be honest, but it has to be verifiably honest. You have to be able to prove it. And this is something that, I guess we have a lot of technocrats in our society, and maybe we have some people who, really are malefactors and don't have good intentions. But I think there are a lot of well-intentioned technocrats who think, well, why don't we just all vote on the internet, and we can devise a computer system that will work fine. And that's, like you say, it's utopian, it's foolish, and it would destroy our system. We have got to get faith back, and that means we've got to be more attentive to those systems that not only make elections fair, but make it so you can prove it to people that they're fair.
And Mike Lindell, the MyPillow CEO, is really at the forefront currently of trying to prove election fraud, not necessarily from a political party standpoint, but from a standpoint that all Americans, Democrat, Republican, Independent, whatever you identify as politically, need to be concerned with election fraud, with the ability for things to be electronically tampered with via the internet, and looking at capture packets and really verifying votes. It's important because if we do allow any kind of tyranny, if we allow any kind of corruption, and we are passive and we don't do anything, the entire nation can be taken. And if we turn socialist, which will then, we're on socialism light, right? Which is what we're seeing. It'll be full-blown Marxism or communism in the future. It takes triple the amount of decades to try to get it back to a democratic republic. So this is a very important initiative for people to understand and to get involved in your state, knowing what the Electoral College is, knowing what's happening from a federal viewpoint, but also your state viewpoint, and protecting our rights. This is a constitutional right that we need to protect. What do you say to even the conservatives who say, you know what, Shannon, Mr. England, the Constitution is a little outdated, and I think that it needs to be revamped. It needs to be modernized because I think we live in a different age.
I would take people like that more seriously if they had the same education or a comparable education and set of core understandings as the American founders. The American founders recognized human nature is fallen, right? You can't trust anybody. Government is not about good intentions. And when governments go wrong, it's not about bad intentions. Usually it's about people who have such good intentions that they're willing to bend the rules to get themselves more power because they think they're going to do really good things, right? I mean, that's the history of even Soviet communism, right? These young, bright-eyed Soviet students who kind of led the Russian Revolution. They really believed they were going to bring about heaven on earth, right? And in their utopian zeal, they led to a system that slaughtered tens of millions of people, right? In their well-intentioned zeal, right? In a sense, at least at the beginning. So the problem with so many of these people today is they think that good ideas are enough. The American founders understood that good ideas are not enough, right? You actually have to understand how these things interact with human nature. And you mentioned people on the right. I mean, you look at the Bush administration and what they did in Iraq, and there are all kinds of foreign policy debates you can have about that, but what they didn't understand, they basically sort of pulled a page out of the Woodrow Wilson book of foreign policy, was that you can set up elections in a country like Iraq, but if the people hate each other, don't trust each other, and don't trust the system, democracy solves nothing, and it actually makes things worse.
Absolutely.
I mean, Christians and Jews and Yazidis and others have been slaughtered in Iraq or forced into exile, partly, and it wasn't their intentions, right? The Bush administration, I think, had great intentions in Iraq, but they were so naive. And these reformers that we see today are so naive when they think that they're going to tinker with the work that the American founders did and come up with something better without being a fraction of the amount, thoughtful as the American founders were. So no, I think it's really disturbing. And the answer is people like all the listeners to your program, right, who have this Christian grounding, this understanding in the fundamental greatness of our system. We understand that America's not perfect, right? We have great principles because they're based on biblical truths. We have a great system because it was created by people who believed in those truths. And yet it's not perfect. It relies on all of us to defend it and to try to make it better in realistic ways, right? By really trying to fill out where we've fallen short on those principles, not by, throwing away things wholesale and, throwing out the Electoral College or throwing out the First Amendment or the Second Amendment. I mean, that is the road to ruin.
Corruption breeds hatred, hatred breeds corruption, so on and so forth. The Bible says the heart is desperately wicked and deceitful above all things. And I think that when we run a nation and people in government are very emotionally charged, our emotions deceive us. They blind us. We need to take a step back and think logically. We need to look at history. We need to look at what the Founding Fathers enacted in the Constitution. We need to look at our Bill of Rights, and we need to be objective. Just say, you know what? There's a lot of emotion and political nonsense on both sides that becomes noise, and it confuses the people, and get back to education foundation for a better America. And that is what I see Save the State is actually doing. That foundation of a better America with an understanding of the Electoral College. It is very important for us to teach our young people, the next generation coming up, why this is so important. AOC and the 4 horsemen of the apocalypse that are trampling along with her are doing a very good job of getting into the education system and brainwashing through indoctrination the young generation who's going to be the next wave of voters. And do you or your organization do anything to combat that from a collegiate level, a high school level, or even a grade school level?
Yes, no, absolutely. I mean, that is a big part of what we do at Save Our States. Folks can go on the website at saveourstates.com and find some of our materials. But last year we released, of course, releasing a documentary into COVID was not ideal, but it is what it is, and we continue to push it. We've got great responses on Amazon. We produced a documentary called Safeguard, an Electoral College Story. It tells the story of our Constitution, checks and balances, and federalism, and separation of powers, and all these concepts that then are, sort of wrapped up in the Electoral College, and explains why all this matters so much to us even today, right? So we do that. I travel around the country and speak to organizations, especially if they have young people, because we know that's so important. One of the reasons we're here at CPAC is to connect with young conservatives who have organizations around the country We send out materials. I wrote a book last year called Why We Must Defend the Electoral College. We provide that for free to student groups because this is so important.
Yeah.
We win or lose based on whether we can educate enough people in the next generation to stand with us and defend this system that we have.
And we need to stop being complacent as believers. We also need to stop being complacent as American citizens. I like to say all the time, and my listeners probably get tired of hearing it, but we live in a society where it's Netflix and chill, popcorn and American Idol. We have a cognitive dissonance, unfortunately, that separates us from the ability to really make change. We need to get active, we need to be educated, we need to be going into our school systems, we need to be teaching the next generation the foundational principles that we care about and how we care about them for a better future and for a better America. Mr. England, it was wonderful having you on Voice of Truth. Again, give the people your website so if they'd like to get more information.
Sure thing. It's saveourstates.com, or you can search on social media for Save Our States. We'd love to be connected with you.
saveourstates.com. Look at them on social media. If you're watching on one of our social media pages, we will have a link in the description below for you so you can click it. And again, thank you for listening, watching, supporting, donating to CSN Radio as well as Voice of Truth. We couldn't do it without you. We wouldn't be here at CPAC with wonderful men and American like Mr. England if it wasn't for you. God bless and